Welcome to the second episode of Registers. 36 clipboards. Fancy, isn't it? So,
Shall we?
today I will explain the code, more or less, how it's structured, how it works, and actually, I am willing to brag a bit. I think it's one of the best written code of recent time. So first of all, let's go through the dependencies that you will need to use this. First of all, this utils key corridor. Well, first of all, I need to say that all of the code that you see in all of my HK videos are in lib-v2. I leave a link to my GitHub profile under every single video, and then you can just track the paths because they are the same there as well. So, utils key corridor. You don't actually need it here. It's not used here, that's why it's commented out. It's for you to know where to find it, but not because you need it. So let's go to functional, where I actually declare my hotkeys for registers, and you can see really often key corridor being used because it makes sense to. Because if you want to paste something, first I press the hotkey to paste, and then the actual register that I want to paste. I think K, yeah, it doesn't have anything. So it's technically pasted, but not really. What do we even have? Well, it doesn't matter, really. So you would use key corridor in some other place, probably, in your file that you define your hotkeys and stuff like that. So you would include it there. Here it is. No, that's not it. Interesting that I don't include it here, but I should. Nevertheless, that's something that you need. Then paths, you actually don't need it. Why? Because it's just a class that I use for all of the paths that I use in my code. So if I ever remove something or rename something, I can just rename it here, and it's changed throughout the whole project. And I need paths here because I specify the registers directory here. So the folder that will contain every single register file. Well, you don't have the paths class probably, although I very much recommend it if your project seems to grow at a very high rate. It has a lot of files that's really annoying to refactor and change. But if you don't, you just change it here and provide your path. Okay, then abstractions text. Naturally, registers reads and writes a lot of files, and I have a couple of abstractions that I've been using for a while now. First of all, write file. Can you guess what it does? It writes a file with the text that you provide. Then append file. It appends text to a file. It's pretty self-explanatory, really. And read file, which reads the file and returns the text in it. And one more function that you would think you don't need, switch files. Essentially, it takes the contents of two files and switches them around. So file A's contents will now be in file B, and file B's contents will now be in file A. The reason why we can't just use read file and write file is because when we need to close the object of the file, it actually doesn't happen fast enough for us to open the file again to write to it, so we might lose the data of one file. And what's even worse is that you don't even have a guarantee that you will. You might not, or you might lose one of the files, or both potentially. So that's why we need switch files, which is far more explicit than if you just try to use write file and append file, which once again didn't work like I expected it to. Alright, info is a video that I made before. I will leave a link to it in the description. Essentially all the stuff that you see. So let me try to do some command, and I write to K, this thing that you just saw on the top left is an info. It's just a way to display information. You could, in theory, use message box, but that would be too annoying. You could use tooltip, but it would be too small and hard to read. You could use tray tip, which would appear here, but that's way too long and annoying. Sometimes you get a notification and it just fucking stays there forever for close to no reason. Yeah, and that's why I made infos, to display information in a nice, clear, visible way, to make it go away for either fast or long. And yeah. The video that I made actually elaborates on the function version of this, and after some time I rewrote it into a class, but it pretty much works the same way, I think, though more readably and more changeably. I don't think I'm going to go over it specifically because it works the same exact way as it did in that video, so if you're interested, watch that video. It's in lib-v2 tools info.ahk, and the link to the video on it is in the description. So extension string is actually a library by Descalada. If you go to my thing on it, extension string.ahk, you'll find the link to the actual library, which is probably going to be more recent than whatever I'm using, because I might forget to update my libraries that are not mine. So this library is made by Descalada, amazing author, and I've shouted out this library a couple of times in my videos before. Essentially, a lot of the functions for working with strings are now methods that you can use. So something along the lines of string, and then you can substring from this to maybe 5. And let's try it out if I even did the syntax correctly. I think I did. I don't know. Damn, sure, let's try it out. Yeah, that works. So, and many other really useful things to use, which are not technically required, but are just so nice that I might as well, you know? Okay, these info timeout, registers directory, and valid registers, and max peak characters I already explained in my last video of the series. There's a link to that in the description as well. But first of all, there are a couple of helper functions which are private, meaning you're not supposed to call them. That makes the class work better. First of all, validate key, which is called in pretty much every method of this. What does it do? It validates the key. If we try to press escape after pressing a hotkey, it says action cancelled, because by pressing escape and canceling the action, essentially, we're passing nothing as a key. So if we pass nothing, we throw an error, and usually it would throw an error that you would see in the message box by AHK, but we catch it to make that window, that info rather, open. We'll get to that. But there's another thing. If you say I go to the Russian layout and try to do something, it throws an error as well, because the character that I typed in, not sure how to pronounce it, even though I'm Russian. It's wild, honestly. Since I didn't put it in valid registers, it's not a key that is allowed. So validate key checks for that as well. Why do we need that? Because I don't really know all the time what layout I'm using. Maybe I expect to be using the English layout, and then I copy something to like the K register. Now it worked. But if we didn't have this error handling, and I am on Russian layout, I do the same exact key sequence that I would expect to copy to the K register, but I actually copy to some random Russian register that I'm not even like sure about. I wouldn't know about it. And then when I try to paste from the key register, there's nothing in it, or worse, there's something else in it. And by catching the key that I know I wasn't going to use, I get some safety. So now if I'm on Russian, I'll know about it. And the error message, I feel like, is pretty useful. The key you passed isn't supported by registers, and it even says how to add keys that you want to work. But once again, since registers are just files in this implementation, some keys won't work even if you add them to valid registers. Something like, I don't know, ampersand, I don't think you can put it as a file name, and at the very least I think you shouldn't. So some keys you can add and they will work, some keys won't. Okay, try get registered text. Okay, so say you try to peek some register. First of all, you change your layout, of course. So the K register is currently filled with something. Let's overwrite it and look at it again. Okay, it's empty, but one thing to consider, the file still exists. And when we look at all of my registers, there aren't exactly 36 here. So some registers don't even exist yet. And if you try to read the contents of a file that doesn't exist, you will get an error. When I'm peeking, like, I don't know, register V, I don't care whether the file exists or not. I want to know, is this register available? So whether or not that file exists, what I want to know, if there's nothing in it, then just give me an empty string saying there's nothing here. So this method is specifically for that. If the file exists, well, read the file. But if it doesn't, don't throw errors, just give me an empty string to show in the info. Format register. This function is actually for the peek method. Let's try out to see. Okay, 8. 8 is perfect. So 8, if we actually look at it, it's multi-line, but infos, the class, isn't built to show multi-line information. If we try to add something more like another info, you see that it overlaps the first one because infos are supposed to be a single line. As you can see, they can still show multi-line, but they won't overlap only if it's a single line. So when we do peek all registers, I want everything to be a single line only. For that, we first of all replace all of the new lines with \n, and then we also cut the information provided to 100 characters, but specifically to max peak characters, which you can change. So by default, when you peek, there will only be up to 100 characters, making peeking stuff like better, I think. And then if you want to see all of it, you just use the look method. Great. Format register name. If we come back here, you can see that the only thing that we need to pass is the actual key, the actual character of the register. Even though it's actually a file, we don't need to provide the full path. Like you would otherwise need to like C, then programming, then registers, then reg_k maybe, and then .txt. That is way too much when really the only thing that's going to change is this character. So because of that, we have getPath, which gets the path. You pass the key and it gets the entire path that we actually need to read and write files. And we have the opposite, format register name. We pass the name of the file and it converts it to the actual key. This is used in one other method that we're going to go over. By the way, to come back, you see that we're using regex replace as a method, and this is actually a substring of the string that we got here. That's what I'm using the string library for. This can technically be rewritten to use default AHK to remove a dependency, but I recommend you to use the library regardless. One thing, it will work regardless of whether it's LF or CRLF. So Windows usually has the return thing or not. It will work regardless. Like multi-lines will be converted correctly. You don't need to worry about that. Okay, coming over, cancel action. So once again, we try to cancel an action and it says action canceled. You can actually make this action anything you want. I think it makes sense to use infos to tell you, yo, you did indeed press escape. I'm a very anxious person about stuff like this. I might press a key and then be not sure whether I even did. And having an infos that doesn't stay that long, just half a second, is very useful. So this function, this method technically, like is called in pretty much every method if you cancel it or if you pass an empty string as the key. Now, to get to the actually useful methods that you might call explicitly, meaning public methods. If you're here just from AutoHotkey, there's no concept of private or public. In some other languages like C#, for example, that exists. So we're currently in a class. Some methods we make just to call them from the class itself. So something like __ cancel action. You're not really supposed to call it outside, like from a hotkey or whatever. It's just here to be called from within the class to make all of it more readable and understandable. So it's private. And there are methods that you are actually supposed to call, like all of these that you currently see. So it's public. I think it's a very useful concept in making even more use of classes, being able to separate stuff into what you're supposed to call and what you're not supposed to call. Okay, read. Once again, a register is just a file, but maybe you want to get what's in a register without yeah, here you have peek to actually visibly look at what's in the register, but maybe you actually just want the text in a register to do something programmatically. Well, you would use registers, read, and then you pass a key, maybe the K register, which currently has nothing, so maybe 8. And I guess you could do this. I mean, that took so long, but yeah. Well, this is essentially what we're doing here is look, the method look, but if you need the text of a register, read will help you. And it also exists because it is called by multiple other methods in the class. Truncate. Difficult word, I know, and kind of goofy as well. It comes from Linux, actually. Been using Linux for some time, and truncate essentially means remove some data from a file without deleting the file itself. So maybe we have something in the K register. I'm using truncate right now, and boom, everything that was in that file is no longer there. Okay. To come back to how most of these methods are structured, first of all, we try to validate key, which is the thing that throws errors if something is wrong. So we tried it, but if it actually did go wrong, we catch a certain error, which is this error, if we don't pass anything. So for read, if we passed nothing as a key, we return nothing. So there is nothing in the nothing register, essentially. But if everything went right rather, and you pass the correct key, then we get the path, which once again is just getting the full path of the register, and try to get the register text, which already explained will return something no matter what without throwing an error. Truncate works in a very similar way, where it tries to validate the key. If we passed nothing, then we do cancel action. And this kind of thing is actually repeated in pretty much every method. So you need to pass a key. It will actually throw you an error if you pass the key that you don't support, that you choose yourself. But if you pass nothing, then it will do cancel action. Okay, and then we get the path, write file, which just writes the file with nothing. It should be this technically. For more readability, we write an empty string to a file, but in my abstraction, the second parameter by default is an empty string, so I just omit it. And then we provide an info saying this register key is cleared and that info stays for this long. Okay, write the contents of your clipboard to a register. You can see that most things are pretty much the same, so I'm not going to go over them more and more. So we write the contents of our clipboard to a file, show that we did, append. We append by using append file, and we provide a new line here to make sure we don't just append on the same line, which, at least for me, is usually not what I actually want. I want whatever I append to be on the following lines. Write or append is actually a thing that combines them both. In Vim, if you access a register using a lowercase character, then you overwrite that register. But if you access a register with an uppercase letter, then you append to it. So I mimic this behavior of Vim in write or append, which is why I don't have write or append. I actually use this method, like always. So let me show it off. I showed it off in my previous video, but maybe you didn't watch it, in which case I recommend to. Okay, so what's even in my clipboard? Some link. So I do my hotkey, Windows K, and then capital K, and appended. But then I can do the same thing with a lowercase k, and it overwrites it. All in one hotkey, very useful. Looking at this to see whether there's something to explain. Well, I guess if the key that we passed is uppercase, then we append. But if it's not, then we write. So pretty straightforward. Paste uses clipsend, a function that I don't think I actually include here, which is an issue, and I should. I'm glad that I caught it at this point, so you need this as well. People who only watched the first video will be tripped up because they don't have clipsend. So using send, or even send raw, or even send input raw is way too slow. It's much better to grab the data that you want to send, move it to the clipboard, and then just use Control V to paste it. Well, rather Shift Insert, because Control V is actually taken up by some places. Like if we go to NeoVim, Control V won't paste, it goes to Visual Block. So I make sure to use Shift Insert so it works regardless of the app that you're using, because at least seemingly everything supports Shift Insert, but not everything supports Control V. And we do a bunch of smart stuff, so your current clipboard isn't overwritten. If you use ClipSend with default settings, you will paste whatever you wanted to paste in a very fast way, and you will keep your clipboard. So I have a video on ClipSend on my second channel actually, and I will link it to the description. Yeah, that's about it on ClipSend. I will definitely go back eventually. Whoa, we got back. See, we're using the read method that we specified here to get the contents of a file that we're going to ClipSend then. And then we say that we pasted that thing. So technically, instead of ClipSend, you could just use send raw. That would work, but far slower. So I don't recommend to, but you could also remove this dependency as well. Run I fucking love. Essentially it lets you run the contents of a register. So currently it has a link. I do Windows JK and it opens that link. Yeah, that's the first video. And if we try to put a comment here, if I didn't implement comments, then if we try to run this, it would throw an error. What? I don't understand it. Like, it literally just worked. Wild. I'm not sure why this happens, but let me tell you, it's not because of the comment. Not sure why otherwise though. But yeah, you can specify comments here, so you can run whatever commands you want and then also explain them without getting errors being thrown at you saying we can't run this comment because it's a comment. So you can also do explore.exe, and if it works for you, amazing, because for whatever reason right now this is broken and I have no idea. Maybe you could do a pull request in case you know what the issue here is. So we take the text of register, remove all the R things which are just not needed here, and then stir split, meaning we split the entire file by new lines, and now we get every single line in this commands array. And then we go through the array. If the line or the current command starts with a semicolon, then we ignore that line. But if it isn't, we run that line or the contents of that line. Peek non-empty, it's what I use for this. It shows the contents of every single register that is not empty. So we just loop through all the text files in the registers directory that you specified here. And that's actually where we need one helper function that I mentioned earlier. So we read the text of a file that we're currently on. And the reason why I'm not using the read method that I specified in this class is because we already have the full path. We might as well use it rather than converting it to a single key first and then converting it back. Would be kind of stupid, don't you think so? So we get the text. If there's no text, ignore this file, and that's why it doesn't show there. But if there is some text, well then first format it so it works the same way like peek does, and now we get shorter register contents for every single one of them. And then format register name. The smallest path kinda that we can get looks kinda, well, I guess I couldn't just show the function. That's the smallest thing that we can get, but what we actually need here is the K letter, and that's why we have this function to convert reg K into just K. Okay. And now we get the letter at the start. Beautiful. And after that letter in a semicolon, or rather just a colon, a double colon. Yep, a double colon, surely. We show the actual contents the same way peek does. And here it is, peek. It's the same thing, but even easier. Nothing here really is something that you haven't seen before. And look actually uses the read method and just displays this whole text in infos. But once again, don't use it for more than one thing. Oh, I didn't actually use look because it will overlap. Maybe you don't care that much about this, but if something is going to overlap, you're not going to see it, so why bother having multiple at once? And once again, remember that you can press escape to close your infos. Move. Interesting thing about move. So let me try to use it and then cancel it. I just pressed escape, and that in theory should cancel the action that I'm doing. No, I actually needed to press it 2 times. Is that a bug? No, not really. Because before we actually pass the arguments to the move method, we first need to evaluate them. So we need to wait for one thing and then also for the next thing, so for both keys. So first I would have to press escape 2 times to pass it into the move method, and only then can it, where am I? Yeah, and only then can it validate those keys and cancel the action. Kinda unfortunate how this works, but it's reasonable. A way to make it require only one escape is if you made it in the hotkey, like made some error handling here. But it's way too annoying to look at, so I would rather just press escape 2 times. Aside from that, there's nothing really that you haven't seen before. And switch contents makes use of the switch files function that I showed off in the beginning of this video. And that's actually it. So if you enjoyed this video, press a like, type some comment, maybe you have a question or suggestion. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss my content, but most importantly, stay fresh, cheese bags, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye!